Turn it up, swashbucklers. You're listening to Under the Crossbones, episode number 36. My name is Phil Johnson, and it is a pleasure to be here. Thank you for listening in. I always appreciate it. You can get all the show notes for this show at underthecrossbones.com/036. And I've got a great guest for you today. My guest today is Benerson Little, and if you're not familiar with him, that's cool. I wasn't either until I was introduced to him by my friend Nick Hoffman, who you heard on last week's show. He was our comic on last week's show. Benerson Little is an historian. He is an author. He's the author of 5 nonfiction books on piracy and sea roving, and they're really in-depth and technical, and I think you're going to dig them. He's also got a novel out, and he's working on sequels, all piratey stuff. He's considered a leading expert on piracy, past and present, Somali, old golden age, whatever. And he's the historical consultant for Black Sails on the Starz network. See, Stales and Stars, it all came out of my mouth at once. So it's a great interview. A little bit longer interview today because there was so much good stuff to talk about that I actually feel like I need to bring him back on for a second interview because we glossed over some things that I would love to dig deeper into, and we dug deep into some really cool things in this interview. So listen all the way through. You're going to enjoy this one with Benerson Little. I absolutely guarantee it. I had a light weekend. I had a great show Friday night in San Francisco at the Sports Basement, which I know sounds weird. It's a sporting goods store, it is, but they actually have a performance space in the basement because it's San Francisco and everything is a potential performance space. And it was part of the San Francisco Comedy Crawl, which was 4 comedy clubs, all bang, 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 one after another. And my show at the Sports Basement was the first one of the crawl. Very fun. I was just doing a short, like a 10-minute set, and I did 8 minutes of new material, which is great because I've been doing some writing, cranking some stuff out. See, if you're not in the comedy biz or unfamiliar with it or whatever, it can take sometimes 2, 3, 4 years to write an hour of material. My last special took me 4 years to write because I got 2 years into it and I realized it wasn't good enough, and so I spent the next 2 years rewriting it. That's how long it can take. There are nutcases out there like Louis C.K. who pumps out another hour every year, or Carlin did a similar thing. I don't write that quickly because I'm also writing other things. But so's Louis. He writes a TV show. Who am I to complain? I should probably just end this podcast right now and sit down and write some more. That's what I feel like. But anyway, here's what I do. So I did 8 minutes worth of new material. One bit was about 3.5 minutes. The other one was about 4 minutes or so. And videotaped them so I could check it out. And then this morning, here's sort of the inside baseball on stand-up comedy. I looked at the video this morning, and I marked down which lines got laughs and which ones didn't, whether they were supposed to or not. And then I went through and I counted up my laugh lines, right? And so the saying is that a professional comedian should be getting a laugh every 7 to 10 seconds, right? Isn't that amazing? That sounds like a lot, right? And generally, I do that with stuff that is been worked out and all that kind of stuff. So I went through and I counted my laugh lines and did the math. And one of the bits was like every 14 seconds, and the other one was laugh every 12 seconds on average. So they're kind of there. They're getting there, but I need to jam 3 or 4 more punchlines in there. And actually, a lot of it, what it ends up being is just shortening the setups. The punchlines are good, but I just need to shorten the setups and just work it out and get it tighter and things like that. So there will be some rewriting done, and I will, keep pumping those out on the road as we go here, as I keep writing. I'm about maybe halfway through writing my next special, which is excellent because it's only taken me a year to get halfway through writing my next special. I'm hoping to get the rest of it written this year and film early next year, possibly. If you haven't seen my most previous special, it's called Pretty from the Back. It's a full hour, 15-minute show, something like that. And you can get it on my website, philjohnsоncomedy.com, digital download, hard copy DVD, whatever you want to do, audio only. It's all there. Anyway, there's that. You might be wondering why I have not mentioned the JJ show from Saturday. If you were thinking about it, you might not have been thinking about it because you could be listening in New Hampshire and really not care. But I was supposed to play my hometown on Saturday night, San Jose, California, in a club called JJ's, which I was excited about because it's a well-known, cool little club here, and I haven't played my hometown in probably a year and a half. So I was looking forward to it. Had a bunch of people coming out. It was going to be a great time. The day before, the producer of the show posted on the Bay Area comedy Facebook group that we all have here. He posted, "Hey, there's no show at JJ's this week, so we're just going to do an open mic, and everybody come." And I was like, "Oh, hey, I was booked. I was booked to headline, close the show." And he was like, "Oh, man, I'm sorry. Let me find out if I can still get the money from the venue." So he had forgotten he booked me, which is it's always a nice feeling to be absolutely forgotten. So he contacted the venue. He tried to get the money. The venue never got back to him. He assumes they are mad at him for not having booked a show for this month, which he had booked a show for this month. So 2 strikes against this guy. And so the show didn't end up happening. I had to let everybody know, send some emails out to my fans and other people who were coming, that the show would not be happening. So hopefully I'll be booking something for a San Jose show in my hometown here in the next couple months. I really should work on that because I haven't played for these folks around here in a while, and I would like to because it's home and I get to come home and sleep in my own bed after, which would be nice. So anyway, the last week I've been doing a bunch of interviews that you're going to hear over the next couple of weeks. I like to stockpile them up so that when I'm on the road traveling, I have stuff to send you guys and don't have to worry too much about it. So I've been doing a bunch of interviews this week. It's going to be, there's some really cool stuff coming up that you are absolutely going to enjoy. And that being said, other than that, I didn't have a terribly exciting week. I did a gig, I wrote, I interviewed. I finally saw The Good Dinosaur with my girlfriend. It was not an exciting week. So anyway, that being said, I'm going to shut my face, and we are now, right now, are you listening? We're going to listen. We're going to do it. We're going to listen to this incredible interview with historian, author, and black sales consultant, Benerson Little. Check it out. Here we go. A guy that I've recently learned about through my friend Nick Hoffman, and as I went in to read a little bit about you on your website and stuff, you've done 1,000 different things. So tell me, when somebody asks you what you do, how do you describe it to them?
I have a pretty hard time doing that. I don't really necessarily identify with any particular profession, past or present or anything else that I've done. I generally tell them that I'm a combination of researcher, writer, historical consultant. If I'm marketing for some reason, I'll probably throw former Navy SEAL in there because that's popular right now. I don't know quite how to explain what I do or what I want to do, except that I'm very satisfied with it. It's more of that Renaissance notion of, trying everything, seeing what you can do well, and that we should all be somewhat lettered and try to research, write about things that we know, learn about things that we don't know, and the usual follow our passions and such. Occasionally, I'll have people say, "Oh, you write books? They must be like your children." And my immediate response is, "No, my children are like my children. I'm very family oriented. I've got 2 daughters. I remarried. I've got 2 daughters who are basically graduating, one undergraduate, one graduate, and my wife now, that I've known for years, is pregnant, so we'll be having a son sometime in June. And
congrats.
I don't know how to explain it. It's just everything is kind of wrapped up and connected as well. Everything from family to raising family to going out and trying to have adventures to reading and writing books and meeting people. And I don't know. It's just all very, very connected. And I'm not sure there's a good term for it. I haven't come up with one.
All right. Valid.
Valid. What you do, whatever I please is not quite it either, but
I like it. Cool. Yeah. And that makes sense. I sort of live my life along the same lines where it's, this is what I'm going to do now. And that may not be what I'm doing down the line a little bit, but can you give us the highlights of some of your past achievements, some of the books, some of the other things that you've done, just as a sort of a quick overview for people who aren't familiar with you?
Again, that might be a little bit difficult. I'll just go back to the beginning, basically. Isn't that from
Sure.
Princess Bride or something? Go back to the beginning. Anyway, I was born. My father was in the Navy. My parents were from South Alabama. They both wanted to get away. My father joined the Navy, I think, when he was 18. A few years later, he married my mother when she was 18. They left. I was born in Key West, Florida. So the first about 10 years of my life, I lived in everywhere from the D.C. area to Florida to San Diego and Los Angeles, and a couple of years in Japan. About that time, my parents had this brilliant idea, or they thought it was brilliant, that my father, who was then stationed aboard the aircraft carrier Constellation, and they were ramping up the bombing off Vietnam, and the chances for extended deployments were significant. So he figured it would be great for us to all move back to their hometown in South Alabama. It's Greenville, just for a year. It's cheaper cost of living and everything else. My father was he might have been a chief petty officer by then, but still, you're not making a lot of money, and you get to go back with family. Well, for me, it was culture shock. In spite of my parents being Southern, I had not been brought up as a Southerner. Going back to the Deep South, and basically, I guess around 1970, segregation was about to start. You had the civil rights movement, and for me, it was a very alien world, and not one that I fit in with very well at all. But I had an aunt of mine give me a book. She knew I liked to read. It was Treasure Island, and it was an annotated copy. And I not only enjoyed the story, but I kind of turned my grandparents' 40 acres, where I visited a lot, into my own little treasure island. And for me, it was escapism. And I liked the story, but I also liked the fact that in the margins, a lot of the technical details about sailing or firing a pistol or something were annotated. With hindsight now, looking back when I looked at the book, I realized a lot of the annotations were incorrect, but it didn't matter. It got me interested in it. And, over the next few years, I ran across Exmelon's Buccaneers of America.
Sure.
Actually, in a junior high school library, believe it or not. You don't see books like that in libraries anymore. I guess in schools now. But matter of fact, I remember my high school library had books on fencing, Southern California high school. But anyway, started reading all these things in different journals. Junior high school, at a book fair at school, I picked up a copy of Captain Blood, little paperback copy, still have it. Loved that book. And so I always had this little passion in the back of my head for doing these things. My father, having been in the Navy and traveled a lot, I figured I might go in the Navy. Graduated high school, went to college, did my freshman year at USC, and then decided to transfer to Tulane, which was closer to my parents. My father had retired, moved back east, so I decided to be closer to my family. Fenced at Tulane, had fun, decided I'd go in the Navy, became a naval officer, went through BUDS, Basic Underwater Demolition and SEAL Team. Spent, I guess, about almost 8 years in the Navy, most of that either in BUDS or at SEAL Team 3 or SDV Team 1 at that time. And got out, thought I might be interested in law school, discovered I really didn't like lawyers. Held a variety of different jobs at that point, but I realized as over the years I've been reading all of these journals, a lot of these primary sources just as a hobby. This one book I've been looking for was about tactics of pirates, sea rovers, things like that.
Uh-huh.
And I hadn't seen anything like that. And I realized that with my experience, both from SEAL Team, I had a perspective that I hadn't seen anybody have on books on piracy. Working with small units in a maritime environment, a lot of the things we did were very similar. Everything from shipboardings to even the type of men who were doing that. They're basically adventurers in SEAL Team. So I felt that I had a good sense of what that world might have been like. And I had a lot of insight reading these journals that just had a sense that I understood that a lot of the men that were doing these things. And you read William Dampier, however you want to pronounce his name, journals. For me, it seemed very familiar in the sense the way the men behaved, the way they reacted. So I decided that with all my research, I could start doing more research and write a book about tactics. And that was the first book, The Sea Rover's Practice. But it's really a book about not just the tactics of pirates, but also about privateering, even naval commerce raiders, because they're all basically the same tactics. Of course, publishers, if you read the subtitle, it's pirate tactics and techniques. It's because publishers love the word pirate, so you can write a book about privateers, and I'll guarantee you they're going to slap the word pirate on them somewhere because they figure it's going to sell better.
Sure. Now, if I can interrupt you for a second, when you are talking about tactics, are you talking about like this ship goes here and this ship goes here? I'm totally not a tactician, so I have no idea what the jargon is. But
basically, yeah, everything from, I'm sorry, I talked over you there.
No, that's okay.
Basically, everything from intelligence collection to mission planning to recruiting your people to how you find your targets. How did pirates, and privateers cruise for their prey? Once they sighted them, were there problems with sighting them? How did they determine what they were actually chasing? How did they conduct the chase at sea? Once that happened, what was the engagement like? What were the various tactics of engagement? What were the various tactics of boarding, for example? What happened in the aftermath? I touched somewhat also on land warfare. Touched more on it in the next book, Buccaneer's Realm. But basically, anything that pirates would do, or other sea rovers, to capture their prey. Because basically, all sea rovers have the goal of essentially plunder on or near the sea by force of arms. And so the
Right.
tactics, and that's also central to what they really are. We have these ideas of pirates as rebels and all these whether it's a Marxist point of view that they're overthrowing their capitalist overlords, or it's on the other end of the political spectrum, they're knights of the sea, sailing for right and liberty or whatever. But their purpose, and this was really what shaped them most, was the fact that they were, theft, whether it was lawful or unlawful. In the case of
Sure.
privateers, it's lawful theft, but it's still, still theft.
Yeah.
Um, it's just a legal technicality. They're basically stealing goods from other people or
Right.
appropriating. In one case you can get hanged for it, and one you can't. But like I said, I'll start sidetracking if I'm not careful.
That's okay.
But this is central to their existence. And what I didn't see in a lot of books on piracy, most of them seem to be just retelling of the same stories and the same pirates and things over and over. And occasionally there's some scholarly, kind of ideologically based things, but nobody really focused on what they actually were and why they were, which is, robbery at sea, and how this shaped what they were.
Okay. And now going back to the sort of the Navy SEAL comparison that you made before, how many of those tactics are still used? Is there a substantial part of it? I mean, obviously we're dealing with different ships, but
fundamentally they're still very similar. If I'll shift to land warfare for a second, if you look in the late 17th century buccaneers, they're kind of quasi pirates. Often they had legitimate commissions. Sometimes they had kind of dubious commissions, and occasionally they had no commissions at all. And a lot of their operations were conducted ashore. After Jamaica was captured in 1655, almost immediately the British Navy, along with some volunteers, started hitting Spanish towns, and that kind of set a precedent for the Buccaneers to continue from that. But if you look at their actual tactics, they're very similar to modern small unit tactics. I mean, virtually identical.
Huh.
Keep up a constant rate of suppressive fire as opposed to firing in volleys, for example. This was due to the nature of a lot of Spanish defenses with lancers, whether they were mounted or afoot, who would try to charge ranks between volleys. So you learn to keep up a constant rate of fire. Same thing small unit tactics do. You never want lulls in the fire. You want to suppress enemy fire. You start shooting, get them down, keep them down. You don't want everybody changing magazines because your enemy can turn around and suppress your fire. And these Buccaneers actually understood this very well. And not only that, it was not only constant rate of fire, but it was aimed shots, unlike conventional military, which is, just fire volleys in the general direction. These guys were taking aimed shots, taking out point targets. Same thing special operations forces are trained to do. When they would assault a target, for example, a barricade, you'd have men apply fire from the front, and you'd have another group sweeping around to the flank, and then move into close range. And at this close range, they'd actually have their muskets loaded with a ball and 7 or 8 swan shot. They're about the size of a double or triple buckshot, just to fire these, big sweeping patterns at close range. And again, this is all very similar. Same thing if they were assaulting a small fortification or something. Suppress the fire, get people up under the wall, pitch grenades over it, and then, surmount the obstacle. They had a very, very practical, tactical sense of what they were doing. At sea, there's still some similarities. Sea rovers wanted to capture their prizes, preferably not too damaged. A lot of reasons for that. If you get in a slugfest at sea, you might be so damaged that if a pirate hunter came along, you can't escape.
Sure.
A warship, you can't get away. So boarding tended to be a tactic they used a lot. Usually overt boarding, where it's very obvious that you're engaged in planning on boarding, but they'd also occasionally do surreptitious boardings, both of which Naval Special Operations units still use today. They're probably the only people anymore who are actually doing ship boardings at sea. Obviously, our modern destroyers don't engage in fire, but not just for search and seizure, but for retaking ships that may have been captured by terrorists or such, or for other reasons. But it's still still part of the bread and butter of Naval Special Operations are shipboarding actions.
Interesting. That's fascinating. I'm always interested when people are writing about things from this period or from the Golden Age or any time back then, what kind of sources you were going to find out this information, because obviously we don't have a lot of firsthand accounts from the actual pirate ships, even though I suppose many of them were former Navy men, former merchant marine men. Did you go to those kind of sources, or where were you going to learn about this stuff?
Basically, I went to anything that I could get my hands on, but I've come to rely much more heavily on primary sources. One of the things I learned early on was, and I'm not trying to put down necessarily any secondary sources, because clearly that's what I'm writing as well. But I've learned to check endnotes and citations extremely well. Piracy is one of those areas in which, on the one hand, in some places we have a lot of information. For example, the Buccaneers who crossed early on across the Isthmus of Darien, let's say around 1680. We have up to 7 full or partial journals of various parts of this crossing, and then the cruise in the South Sea. I mean, a wealth of information. And yet, in spite of all that information, there are still details that are missing and that are hidden, and it's still subject to some interpretation depending on how you want to look at it.
Sure.
We look at the early 18th century pirates. These guys didn't leave anything really in the way of their own records. We find a few records, but mostly the accounts we have are newspaper accounts. Occasionally somebody might have written an account of their capture by pirates, and it's mostly legal documents. And this lack of information, Charles Johnson's book, for example, his History of Pirates, there's a lot of misinformation in there, a lot of it deliberate. A lot of this stuff was just back then, just like today. You want to write something that the audience really wants. They tended to exaggerate more back then, but Johnson, which was a pseudonym, and it's still debated who he was. I can't think of the name right now. There's another recent theory of who he might be, but anyway, he could be very accurate in some places, but he's extremely inaccurate in others, and he probably had an agenda in a lot of what he was writing. And so it can be difficult to work your way through this to try to find the truth or whatever would serve as the truth. But because we have such a lack of information in many areas, which you quite correctly identified, it's very easy to interpret this stuff in almost any way you want. That's why you see so many views across the spectrum about pirates and what they were. Again, I mentioned the Marxist one earlier. They were all rebels against, the crown, and they were anti-slavery, and they were this and that. And most of it's probably not true. But, the truth is more often than not, found somewhere in the middle.
Sure.
And that's generally what I found. My methodology, besides trying to go to as many primary sources as I can, and the internet, by the way, has been great about that. A lot of this material is much more easy to access. You literally, to get a lot of material even 10 years ago, you essentially had to be associated with the university. I had friends, university professors and things who could pull information for me when I needed it. But the internet's making it a lot easier to get to these primary sources and dig them out. And in another 10 or 20 years, it'll even be better. But the methodology or the standard I tried to go with is actually the standard we used not only in SEAL team for mission planning, but for a couple of years when I was an analyst for Naval Special Warfare Strategy and Tactics, basically developing SEAL team tactics. That is, if we don't get this information right or as right as possible, we're going to get some of our people killed. And that's a fairly high standard. Now, I know that's not going to happen, just doing common scholarship, but you try to hold that standard, it tends to keep me from, trying to delve too much in, writing books that, say, oh, Raphael Sabatini was right. This is what the Buccaneers were really like. They were just like Captain Blood, which I would love to do, but I can't do because, there's some of the, a little bit of it's true, but not a lot. So I've tried to focus strictly on facts and what we can actually figure out what these guys really were like. We tended to sanitize pirates a lot because they're very alluring. These are people who did break with society. Anyone who goes to sea is basically a rebel to begin with. And these guys were in some ways rebelling against a lot of things. The idea, it's like in Monty Python. I can't even think of the name of the skit they did where the wage slaves basically rebel and, their little firm set sail and they start off, going to sack corporate America. I mean, that's appealing imagery.
Right.
And I don't think we should not let that be appealing to us. I think that it's a great symbol, but we also need to remember that these guys were, for example, they were slave traders. That wasn't their primary means, but most men of color they captured, they turned right around and sold back as slaves.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen people argue that Bartholomew Roberts was anti-slave, except for the fact he was capturing slave ships and ransoming them back. And in one case, literally, it's from the trial record. It's well established that when one captain refused to ransom his ship, Roberts said, "Burn it," and they were in too much of a hurry, and the slaves who were still in their shackles, they left aboard the ship to either burn to death or jump overboard. This is clearly not somebody who's anti-slavery.
Right.
There were men of color brought into pirate crews, but they were really a minority. And in many cases, we really don't know what the degree of freedom, especially in the early 18th century, that these men had. I have seen accounts where pirates have treated women prisoners fairly well. I've also seen accounts where they basically gang raped everybody aboard the vessel, too.
Right.
So the idea is to focus on the truth, and we can mete out whatever interpretations we want for the purposes, we want. You don't see slavery, for example, in a lot of movies about piracy. I know Jack Sparrow, Disney has said, I think, is very anti-slavery, which would be unheard of among pirates. But again, this is to appeal to audiences,
Sure.
to make the idea of storytelling and piracy itself more palatable.
With that idea in mind, I know you've done some work with Black Sails as a historical consultant. What do you think of their handling of the slavery situation in that show?
I like it. Like I said, this is the fourth season now. They're finishing filming the fourth season right now. Should have, I guess, the next month they should finish up with it. I've been their historical consultant since they started writing the first season. I've been pleased with the way the show has taken a lot of things. Understand they could never be entirely historically accurate for a couple of reasons. One, it's a prequel to Treasure Island, and Treasure Island actually created some of our pirate myths.
Sure.
So, it can never be entirely historically accurate, and it is entertainment. That said, we had a lot of conversations about piracy and the historical aspects of piracy. And there's a line in one of the recent episodes, and I don't want to give any spoilers away if people haven't caught up on things, but basically, let's just say they're captured. Some of the pirates are captured by some Maroons, and they're making the point that even though we may have brought some Africans into our crews, we have enslaved far more, and that is a fact, and that is directly derived from conversations that we have.
Sure.
But on the other hand, they're also taking it and trying to appeal to that more noble notion or image we have of pirates, as maybe some of them really could identify with slaves or with escaped slaves.
Mm-hmm.
And from a literary sense or an entertainment sense, I don't have a problem with that at all. I don't know in reality how much identification there was between pirates as feeling persecuted and identifying with slaves or former slaves as having been persecuted. That theory is bandied about a lot. I just don't know if there's enough evidence to come down one way or another on it. We also need to remember that pirates were individuals, and where one pirate may have thought slavery was terrible. Nine of his buddies thought, hey, it's more money in our pockets. That's what we do. Where one pirate might have been sexually ambivalent, couldn't care less what anybody's sexual orientation was. There would have been others, we know that would be very hostile, for example, to overt homosexuality, things like that. And again,
Sure.
We're limited by the information that we have. So it's very easy to argue a lot of things. And a book tends to sell better when you come down on one side or another of things and not try to walk the path in the center either.
Sure, yeah. I applauded them for bringing up the slavery issue at all because, like you said, it's just not something that you're going to see in a Pirates of the Caribbean film or something like that. So I was glad that they brought it up. And then when they had Charles Vane identify with them, I was like, okay, now they're trying to soften the blow a little bit of having to bring this subject up at all. So I like the way that they've done it too.
Yeah, they did cover I'm sorry. I think they did cover the ground well, both factually, historically, but also covered some of the theory and the ideas of that we would like to have thought that some pirates at least were sympathetic.
Sure, yeah. What kind of things did did you have to either sort of fight them on or lose the fight on that as far as historical accuracy? I mean, of course, like you said, it's a prequel to Treasure Island, but were there things that you really wanted to get in there as more accurate that you weren't able to?
Yeah, I also have to be careful how I answer this, because I'm not, I'm bound by non-disclosure agreement. I'm not a spokesman for the show.
Sure.
Basically, I had a couple of weeks ago, actually, Danish Broadcasting did a written interview with me that, of course, I had to clear it through Starz and all that, which worked out really well, by the way. They were also very much interested in the issues of sexuality the show has brought up.
Mm-hmm.
So answering this such as I can, my job is basically I give them several different things for them, but one of them is just to give them the history, and I tend to start out with, okay, this is the facts, this is the history, this is what we know. And I'll also say that, something else might be possible. We don't know for sure, but I think it's possible it might have happened or it could have happened. And then sometimes I'll also give them the third option of, well, I really don't think this probably happened, but it's really pretty cool, and you have precedent in pirate literature or pirate films, and so, I think you should go with it. But the ultimate determination is them as well. They've got a very talented group of writers. I've really enjoyed working with them. They are very much into the show. They've wanted to make it as real as they can, within the parameters of the show itself.
Uh-huh.
Within the usual restrictions. It is entertainment. If I had to pick on a couple of things that I'd like them to improve on, hopefully I won't step on any toes or offend any of them when I say this, is one of the costumes. Hollywood right now going with costumes. If you've seen the Three Musketeers on BBC, I mean, I don't know where they got the costumes for that from. Black Sails. The costumes aren't all that authentic in a lot of ways. It's not. But again, they're trying to get a particular image across to the audience, and you can't really object to that.
Certainly.
I think they're interested more of, as long as the audience has a sense, the costumes helping define the character. And again, I don't know. I'm not speaking to the costume designer or anything. This is just some general observations of mine. But I tend to be a traditionalist in things like this. I'd like to see costumes a little more authentic. Same thing with the ships. I think the ships could be a little more authentic than they are. But these are just details. That they don't detract from the storytelling itself.
Certainly not. Yeah. The ships are, for the most part, CGI on there, but I think they've got one or two, three original ships.
Yeah, they've got them set up ashore, and basically they can spin them around, do anything, change things on them, make them serve as, I think, multiple platforms, multiple ships, things like that. I mean, they CGI the ships, and I know CGI is very expensive, but the expense of actually having real ships would just be enormous.
Of course.
To build actual real ships, and then even assume you have good days to shoot at sea and things like that. It pretty much has to be done CGI. I could possibly see a major motion picture with a lot of money putting some ships out, but even then, when they build the sets that they pull at sea, Pirates of the Caribbean and stuff, they're not even really full ships. They're built on modern hulls. They're basically sets at sea.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you go back and look at the Seahawk with Errol Flynn, those ships were basically full-size sets built in inside a water tank with about 6 feet of water and set on tracks so that they could roll them and move them around. And
I don't think any of your concerns about the show are things that haven't been discussed by other people. So I think your NDA is safe. Yeah. In fact, I've had a few people on the show who have supplied prop guns and costuming and things like that to the show who've said exactly the same thing, that it's what they wanted, but it's not the most authentic that could be put out there. So I think you're.
But, I mean, all things considered, it's the most accurate show I've ever seen of any film, any TV show, anything that's on piracy.
By far.
I mean, you can always debate accuracy anyway, but it is. You're right. By far, it's hands down the most authentic show I've seen. I can live with small details like the costuming. That's quibbling in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Because they are getting the story across. It's an engaging show, and again, they're dispelling a lot of myths about piracy as well. It's very much a very gritty, very graphic, much more realistic world than, for example, Pirates of the Caribbean.
Sure. Yeah. Excellent. So you've written 5 nonfiction books, and you have 1 new fiction novel, right?
Correct.
Tell us a little bit about that one.
Well, one thing I forgot to mention earlier when I was talking about all this research is that part of the point I had for doing all this research was to write novels. I'm really interested in writing contemporary novels, but I thought, I grew up on Raphael Sabatini's novels. It probably wouldn't, and I know all of this stuff. I've been researching sea roving tactics and things for years. It wouldn't hurt, for me to try my hand at some historical fiction just for fun. And so that's actually what I started out with. I wrote a very, very long novel, renamed it several times, rewrote it several times. And this was, I'm guessing, starting in the late 80s into the early 90s. It ended up about 250,000 words. I put it aside, didn't do much with it, went to work on some other novels, and then I got taken away from that when Sea Rovers Practice. I found a publisher for that, so I had to write that book, and then I ended up writing another. And I really didn't go back and look at the fiction for a while. I had a bit of a break in the last couple of years trying to find a publisher for my 5th book. I'd had a nonfiction. I'd had a publisher for it, and literally about 4 weeks prior to press, the publisher canceled this imprint's entire history line and just dropped the book.
Oh, no.
And every other one. Books as well. So went around, managed to find an agent. Still took them 2 or 3 years to find a publisher for it. But in the meantime, I went back, started pouring all my fiction back out, started revising. I broke this original novel down into 3 separate novels, 2 of which are in revision right now, and took that to a small press that did a lot of historical fiction because I figured that'd probably be the easiest way, and I wasn't interested in spending another 5 or 10 years trying to pitch it, for one publisher. Fiction is very difficult to get published just because there's so much competition, there's so much out there. Nonfiction is literally much easier to get published, so much easier to find a publisher. So I took it to a small publisher, and they picked it up and had it published in December. It's kind of set post-period. It's set in the 1690s. As I originally envisioned it was to write this one novel, then maybe write some prequels. What'll happen is I'll probably end up writing 2 or 3 sequels, assuming they can stay in print, and then go back about 1679 and pick up this character, Edward McNaughton's history from the beginning.
Okay.
Basically, I used it as a means to use all my research and characters I loved growing up and put them into this kind of historical swashbuckling fiction, of which is not a lot out right now, unfortunately. And I wanted the history to be authentic, the swordplay to be authentic. I've been fencing for almost 40 years. I've been teaching fencing for about 20 years. I was very fortunate to have fencing masters who were Hungarians. People today would call them classical, but they were also serious, competitive, international level. One was an Olympian level fencers as well. My first fencing master, as a matter of fact, had fought duels in Hungary. He died a few years ago, about 6 weeks shy of his 100th birthday, Dr. Francis Old. But anyway, I wanted to write all this stuff, get it down, make it accurate, but have a very gritty, swashbuckling story. I wouldn't compare it necessarily to Black Sails, except in the sense of I think one reviewer talked about one of my nonfictions and said basically it's romantic reality. You kind of want to grab part of the romance, and the adventure that we like, but you also want to keep it as gritty or as real as you can. Also,
sure, yeah.
Kind of satisfies the factual historian side of me, but it also satisfies the romantic in me. And throw in all the adventure that you can in these things and history, and then just link it all together, and we'll see how it goes.
Nice. And what is the name of the fiction book that you have out now?
Fortune's Whelp.
Fortune's Whelp, great. And I'm going to make sure that all of these are linked up on the show notes. I imagine they're all available on Amazon and things like that.
They are. Yeah, they are. I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about fencing then. I have a very limited knowledge of fencing. That being spending one weekend at my best friend's fencing tournament in Southern California. And the first thing I noticed was that it was super engaging for about the first 10 minutes and then mighty boring to watch because it just moved so fast. I had no idea what was going on. So how do you compare fencing in a real life modern situation with the tap, tap, boom, you're done compared to the way, say, Hollywood gives it in a movie?
Well, yeah, there's almost 3 comparisons we could make here. What we might call actual combat with swords, woods fencing, and sport fencing. Modern fencing, sport fencing is of the three weapons, the FA, the dueling sword, is probably the one that still has enough foundation that with that you could almost call it authentic swordplay, and you could take that foundation and do historical fencing, or take it and do Hollywood choreography or anything else you wanted to. The foil and saber have become so driven by artificial rules that determine the attacker as opposed to the defender that they're very removed from the reality of swordplay. Now, that said, that's been a problem for 3 or 4 centuries. The swordplay of the late 17th century onward was basically in two forms of thrusting weapons. There was what they called school play, which we call sport fencing today, and training for the duel. There was a lot of overlap, but the swordplay of the duel is very different in the sense that you don't want to get hit. The idea is to hit and not get hit, as opposed to hitting according to certain rules, or in modern FA, hitting before you get hit.
I see.
So I'm not saying that you can't learn modern fencing. I mean, I also conduct historical fencing clinics and basically practice historical. I don't do any choreography, but I do historical fencing. I even teach it occasionally. And modern FA, I don't really deal with foil and saber anymore because they've changed so much in the last 20 years. But you can work back and forth between those two. And the study of swordplay is something that has a lot of benefits, whatever form you study. Hollywood, again, the choreography, first is that any skilled swordsman 3 centuries ago, or modern fencer even, has a sense of speed and timing that they would just tear these guys up very quickly. Well, and we're assuming that they're not shaking in their shoes because they're holding a real sword and somebody's trying to kill them. But if you put that aside and look at the technique itself, modern fencing is, or even 3 centuries ago, very fast, very simple actions. Choreographed swordplay you see on film also has what I call a false tempo. It's a choreographed tempo, primarily for safety, and they also slow things down so the audience can follow the action. You said it's hard to follow, and it is. Fencing, by the way, is incredibly boring to watch. If you're not a fencer, and most fencers, to be honest, do not watch fencing. The United States Fencing Association has been trying to change that, make fencing more popular, but they've been going around it the wrong way. They need to appeal to fencing as swashbuckling sport, and not as, oh, look at this Olympian, and and let's jump up and down on the strip and things. They need to go back to fencing roots. Sure. Most people start fencing because they want to fight with swords. It's sword fighting. It's not sport. You can't turn fencing into tennis, and you shouldn't. If you do, you lose much of fencing audience. It's a participatory sport. It's not. You can't make it appeal to the masses. I'll get off on a rant here if you'd let me, but you can't make it appeal. If you want to enjoy fencing, you should be a fencer, and the best way to enjoy fencing is by fencing. Some of us will occasionally watch bouts, especially between people we know or friends or something, or once or twice a year here we hold practice tournaments once a month at our club here, but I think we're changing it twice a year now. We have a 3-touch FA round robin. First touch counts 2 points. First person to 3 wins, because it kind of emulates the old dueling technique, and it's a scoring means of scoring they used about 100 years ago to balance the luck that's inherent in sword play with skill. So the first touch counts 2 points, and we also count double defeats. But we make the prize an engraved bottle of good Tennessee whiskey, or maybe this summer we'll do it, or an $80 bottle of rum or something. And that shows you what people fence with. We get out, nobody's going to get a rating for it, but everybody gets out, everybody shows up for it, everybody wants that bottle of liquor, and there's a lot of good camaraderie and sword play, and it's what fencing's about. But anyway, back to Hollywood swordplay. It's fun to watch. I love watching Errol Flynn and Basil Rathbone and Captain Blood. It's all Hollywood. So, exaggerated techniques that wouldn't work in the real world, much of it. Exaggerated movements so the audience can follow it. The movements are slowed down so the audience can follow it. And again, there's a measure of safety built into the choreography as well, because these guys don't have any protection, and even a blunted film sword they were using, which had blunted practice FA blades and Rathbone, Flynn duel, even those things, can take an eye out, if you're not careful. So I dream of the day when, with all the modern cinematography techniques and things we have, we can actually do some film duels that are very fast, very accurate, and using certain film takes, you be able to film this with realistic tempo, realistic actions, and still make it look exciting. I think it can be done, and I know some Hollywood choreographers out there who could do it. But every time you talk to them and say, "Why isn't this done?" they say, "Well, because the director wants it done this way, and if you disagree with them, they'll find somebody else to do it for them."
Of course, yeah, and that's really interesting. You answered a question that I had in my head, which was, is modern fencing just a product of them having gotten so good over the last 3 centuries that the old guys who were fighting on ships probably were slower and things like that. But you said no, that they were actually as fast as the modern guys.
Every generation of fencers thinks they're faster and better than the earlier ones, but I have seen some of these Hungary, for example, owned saber fencing for 50 years. Basically, they lost nothing. If you go back and look at the video from the 50s of some of these guys, they are as fast, and frankly, their technique is better and cleaner, even, I think, than a lot of modern fencers.
Huh.
I had a student of mine who became a very, very good FA fencer. He's just one of those really thin, really wiry guys. I mean, I'm slender, but it almost looked like he had no muscle. But he had incredible speed for a guy who really didn't work out or do anything. And I mean, it's just somebody who was born that way. And there were people born 3 centuries ago like that. They were just fast, and speed can be hard to beat. I really don't. We like to think that training methods and everything make people faster and stronger today, but I really doubt that. Jesse Owens, I think, is probably still the fastest man alive.
Uh-huh.
We have modern racetracks and modern shoes and things, all of which help increase records, and people watch sport to see, records broken. But I really don't think that the quality of the swordplay is any better today than it was 3 centuries ago. I'm finishing up my fencing master's thesis right now, and I've looked through a lot of these old texts and books and accounts and things. They pretty much understood all the same principles we understand today. They didn't use them as much because the more complex you make fencing with a real sword, the more likely you're going to eat your opponent's blade.
Uh-huh.
Because the more complicated your fencing is, more room for mistakes and more time for your opponent to do the simplest thing in the world, and that's close his eyes and just stick his arm out there and you run onto the point.
Right.
But they understood all the principles that we understand in fencing today. If there's any differences, that modern fencing has a lot of physical training techniques. They're doing a lot of studies to try to create reaction time and things like that, but realize that a modern sport fencer is fencing for points.
Sure.
They're fencing for, in the case of foil and saber, it's to earn points according to arbitrary rules of right-of-way. And as a matter of fact, the way they've interpreted those these days is essentially you can start a lunge with your arm bent, which is suicide with a real sword. So it's kind of departed too far. Even my second fencing master, who has a gold medal in team saber from 1956, when he was still teaching up to a couple of years ago, he pretty much given up teaching foil and saber and was only teaching FA, or what was known as the dueling sword, as being the only weapon that still retained its, a strong sense of the original characteristics of swordplay.
That's fascinating. Yeah, because like I said, I had years ago, my best friend was into fencing, and he said, "Hey, do you want to go to a tournament with me?" And I was like, "Hell yeah, I do. This will be great." And like after 10 minutes, I was like, "Man, I am done. We got 2 days of this, really? Seriously?" So I'm glad to hear that even fencers find it boring to watch.
Most of us do. Maybe there are some who, but we want to fence. We want to get out and fence, not watch fencing. I always figured if you ever wanted to have your girlfriend dump you, have her come and watch you at a fencing tournament, make her sit for a few hours. I also considered it a sign of intelligence, and if she came and after 5 minutes said, "I'll see you later, I have better things to do." So.
That's great. Well, I'm a comedian. That's what I do for a living, and you can achieve the same relationship suicide by inviting your girlfriend to a show. So that.
Oh man, that's gotta be hard.
Yeah. So so I have to imagine that watching the scene of Obi-Wan and Darth Vader duel it out in the first Star Wars movie must be just painfully slow for you.
It is, but at the same time, I saw that movie when it came out in '77. I just graduated high school, and I thought it was, I've kind of weaned myself off over many years off Star Trek and Star Wars. I still enjoy them. I wouldn't call myself a Trekkie. I'm not sure what you call a Star Wars fan. I don't have anything against the films, but I'm not as enthused as I was when I was a kid. But I saw Star Wars several times. You know, when I went to freshman year USC in LA, went to the Flip Theater, one of the biggest theaters I think in LA at the time. This wonderful sound system. And there were actually guys running around with lightsabers.
Sure.
Selling back then, but again, this goes back to my goal has never been to destroy, pirate stories or, swashbuckling literature or anything else, because I enjoy a lot of it so much. And it was Obi-Wan. The scene was set up very well, and it's enjoyable. And when I first saw it, I didn't really understand fencing. I didn't start fencing until I was a freshman in college at USC. So I wasn't a fencer yet, so it didn't ruin it for me from that perspective. But Dr. Francis Zoll, my fencing master there, and I corresponded with him literally 2 or 3 times a year until his death many years later when he was almost 100. Just a fascinating old gentleman. It helped. I'll think of his name again in a minute. It helped. I'm sorry, I can't think of his name. The Swede who went to Hungary after 1944 when the Nazis annexed Hungary.
Okay.
Found out Hungary was basically negotiating with the Allies to leave the Axis, and so Hitler annexed Hungary. And at that point, Jews had been largely protected, but they started shipping them off to the death camps. Well, Zold was helping, God, I can't think of his name, is sweet, Wallenberg. Wallenberg went in there and got about 20,000 Jews out. Zold was one of his assistants. He's just this fascinating man who didn't really talk about himself. I learned these things from other people, but he fought duels. And to me, he was kind of an Obi-Wan. Very much this. I mean, he was in his 70s when I was learning the fence from him, and he was just this quick, fascinating. Was this great raconteur, talked about all these fascinating people he had known. Was very modest about his own accomplishments and things. And so for me, if there's anything about that Star Wars fencing scene, it's that I see my first fencing master in that, taking that place at Obi-Wan, like but I can't. So I'm loath to criticize the scene. I accept it for what it is because of the connection I have, not just in my youth, but seeing my first fencing master kind of stepping into that Obi-Wan role. Very, very close parallels between the two men. One's obviously a fictional character, and one had its very, very real, authentic life. But the connection is still there. So I still enjoy it.
That's really great. Well, Ben, this has been amazingly fun, and I feel like there are at least another 3 hours of talking we could do without me saying anything at all. So I probably will have you back on the show again sometime if you would like to do that. But this has been great. Is there anything right now, anything I missed that you need my audience to know?
I honestly can't think of anything. When I start talking, I start tracking in all different directions. It frustrates my wife terribly. I'll start talking about one thing, slip into something else for 10 minutes, and then don't even remember what I started with. So I just really appreciate you having me on. I've enjoyed it.
Good.
Very, very much.
I'm glad. Well, like I said, we'll get all those books and stuff linked up on the show notes, and that'll all be there for you, as well as your website, which is BenersonLittle.com. And we're good. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, and good luck with the comedy. I was glad Nick brought us together.
Yeah, me too. Me too, definitely. I should probably link Nick up in the show notes too. All right, thanks, Ben. We'll talk again soon.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thanks much.
Holy moly, you guys. How was that for an interview? Is he not an interesting guy? Like, I feel like that guy and I could talk for another 3-4 hours and without me saying anything, because he would just have all the good stories. That is Benerson Little, and you can find more about him at BenersonLittle.com. Benerson, Benerson, Little, spelled like little. That's how it works. Go check him out, read his books, find out what the guy is doing. It's all good stuff. I forgot to mention my upcoming tour dates in the first part of the show. Let's hit those real quick. April the 15th, that's this Friday, I'll be at Frank's Place in Fresno, headlining a show there. That's Fresno, California. April the 16th, I will be at 222 Hyde in San Francisco, California. April the 29th at the Washington Inn in Oakland, California. And possibly, I just got a note about this today, but it's a tentative date, April the 30th at the Layover in Oakland, California for a special musical comedy show. You can find out all my tour dates if you just go to underthecrossbones.com and click the tour dates button, and you can find out all that kind of stuff. Got a new sponsor on the show today, and that is Anything Goes Vermont. They're an old world trading post carrying a mix of custom items, modern upgrades, and handcrafted workmanship. You're going to dig this stuff. They offer on-site blacksmithing, leatherworking, chainsaw carvings, Vermont folk art. If you're into the Ren Fair scene or the Pirate Festival scene, this stuff is for you. Anything Goes Vermont carries, they have locally made soap, candles, craft supplies, weird little oddities, seasonal goods like Vermont maple syrup, small farm honey, certified wild ginseng, and bloodworms. Ugh, bloodworms. That makes me feel creepy. Make sure to check out their online sales of New England antiques, even like retro video games and overstock items, all sorts of stuff. You can find them if you go to underthecrossbones.com/AGVT. That's Anything Goes Vermont. Underthecrossbones.com/AGVT. And you can follow the hashtag professional mountain folk. Follow them on Twitter for amazing deals. They're always getting in new and exciting inventory, and what they find may surprise you. That's Anything Goes Vermont. Check them out at underthecrossbones.com/AGVT. Also today, our sponsor is LifeLock. There are real pirates out there, friends, and they are out to take your identity. I'm not kidding. It just happened to me the other day. Yes, I got a note from Uber in my email, and I have an Uber account that I've never even used because I have a car. But I have an Uber account, and I got an email from them that said, hey, we changed your password because a weird thing happened. And I went in, and there were 3 rides that had been ordered in Beijing, China. I am obviously not in Beijing, China, and yet somebody had hacked my account and tried to order 3 Uber rides on my credit card. Fortunately, Uber caught it. They canceled the rides. They figured out what was going on. But that kind of stuff happens. It happens all the time. And I've had a couple other sites get hacked recently as well. So you need LifeLock. And what they do is they go out to all the dark, ugly corners of the web. They make sure your information's not out there. And if it is, they will help you fix it. And that is the good part. So you can get 10% off a LifeLock membership by going to underthecrossbones.com/LifeLock. All you got to do is hit the start your membership button, and you will get 10% off your LifeLock membership. It's a good thing. Do it. I got a free ebook for you. It's a nice ebook. It's The Pirates of Panama, or The Buccaneers of America, whichever title you prefer, by Alexander Exquemelin, which I think we even mentioned in the interview earlier on this show. And you can get that for free. It's a great seminal piece of writing in pirate history from the golden period. And you need it. You can get it free. Go to underthecrossbones.com and click on ebook, free ebook, I think it says. Or if you're out and about and all you got your phone, all you have to do is text the word pirate to 94253. Text the word pirate and your email address, that's important, to 94253, and it will kick you back a link to download that ebook. We got some comedy and music on the show today. Our comedy is from Anthony K., who is a guy out of the Central Valley of California. Very, very funny. He just did a show for me that I booked him on and destroyed. He destroys everywhere because he's funny. You're going to dig it. And then we've got a little bluegrass music on the show today. I don't know about you. I love bluegrass music. And I found a cool bluegrass band from right here in San Jose, and I wanted to play them for you. They're called the True Life Troubadours, and we've got a song from them called I've Got a Mule to Ride. If that is not a bluegrass title, I don't know what is, friends. That's a good one. All right, let's get to it. Comedy from Anthony K. and some bluegrass music from the True Life Troubadours. Here we go.
I was on my way up here, and I was getting terrified on the way here because I don't know if you guys know this on the road, but apparently police stations retire their vehicles. Apparently they allow people to buy their old Crown Victorias. They just peel the stickers off, they take the lights off, they kick the dog out, and they just sell it to like a public auction. And apparently there's people out there that buy these cars and don't think when they drive them around at night, like it doesn't scare people when they get behind them, because it still has the bars on the front and the little spotlight. And I don't know my cars very well, but I know what squad car headlights look like when they get behind me at night, because I may or may not have a suspended license. I'm not going to get into that, but the point is, it's very scary. As soon as I see those little amber lights in the middle, I immediately start crying, okay? That's how I live. I immediately start thinking about my family and what my mom said about how I'm gonna get caught, and then as soon as I get scared, the car drives past me on 28-inch chrome rims. Some weird Mexican dude blowing weed out the window. Like, are you serious? I'm over here swallowing baggies. I'm scared for my life. There's nothing in the baggies, by the way. I just have baggies in my car. Someone said, yeah. I do. I don't smoke weed. I know you think I smoke weed, by the way, because of the color of my face, but I don't. I don't smoke weed. Like, it pays my rent. I'm not stupid. It's just that I just don't, I don't smoke weed. I'm not like a big advocate for weed is what I'm trying to say. I don't really care. I drink too much. I don't have time to do two things. I'm not rich, okay? I don't smoke weed. I'm just not rah-rah for weed. Like, my white friends back home, they love weed. Can't stop telling me about it. They always tell me, you ready? California's the next state to make it legal. It's going to be legal. It's going to be all over the place. And I had to explain to my white friends, listen, Mexican and black people don't care if weed ever becomes legal. We don't care, all right? White people want weed to be legal. You know why white people want weed to be legal? So they can stop buying weed from scary Mexican and black people. They just want to buy it at Kohl's with the towels and just go home like a grown-up. Buy weed like a grown-up. Not have to meet in a gas station with some weird dude in an Escalade or an old retired police vehicle.
I've got a mule to ride. I've got a mule to ride. Ain't got no saddle, but I'm ready to ride. I don't believe I'll go. I don't believe I'll go. Just stay out of trouble. Don't believe I'll go. I've got a mule to ride. I've got a mule to ride. Ain't got no saddle, but I'm ready to ride. Ducks it to the drake, ducks it to the drake. If you're getting my body, have to swim in this lake. I've got a mule to ride, I've got a mule to ride. Ain't got no saddle, but I'm ready to ride. I don't believe I'll go. I don't believe I'll go. Just stay out of trouble. Don't believe I'll go. I've got a mule to ride. I've got a mule to ride. Ain't got no saddle, but I'm ready to ride. I've got a mule to ride. I've got a mule to ride. Ain't got no saddle, but I'm ready to ride.
And that's our show for today, friends. Thank you for listening. Again, if you want to find out more about Benerson Little, you go to benersonlittle.com. If you want to hear more from the comedian Anthony K., go to facebook.com/Anthony K Comedy. And if you want more from the True Life Troubadours, go to truelifetroubadours.wix.com/bluegrass. That's a long one. I'll have all the links to all of my guests and all the books and all that kind of good stuff on the show notes at underthecrossbones.com/036. Keep leaving those iTunes reviews for me. That is super helpful, and I like to read them. Makes me happy to know that you like the show. Also, hit the support page on underthecrossbones.com. There you can donate some money in the PayPal box. You can click on the Amazon banner, buy yourself something nice. I get a little commission that supports the show. Or if you want to be a sponsor of the show, just like Anything Goes Vermont, it's cheap, it's easy. You can contact me right from the website, and I will hook you up. Until next time, friends, sails away. Sails away? That doesn't make sense. Whatever, I'll talk to you next week.